So before we get into landing zones proper, it's really worth taking a little bit of time to talk about where they fit into the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. For those of you who don't know what that is, the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework is a Microsoft strategy. It's built on their experience of moving customers to the cloud, and it kind of compromises expert guidance, tooling, and some best practices. And the idea is if you follow this CAF framework, it will align you to these different phases, and you'll be getting the right advice and the right guidance from the framework when you need it for each of these phases. As you can see, it consists of multiple phases, the framework, and we're just going to touch on these quickly and show how landing zones fit in. So the first phase is the defining of the strategy. So this is generally, as a pre-sales person, we'll come and get involved with customers at this stage. So really trying to understand, why are you moving to the cloud? What is your motivation for doing that? Is it being driven by the business? Are there features and capabilities within the cloud that are out of reach for the current environment? And that's what's driving it. Is it being driven, by the IT department? Are they, realizing that actually, there's a lot more tooling, there's a lot more features that they can leverage on public cloud compared to what the current situation is. So really looking at those different strategies, what the business outcomes are expecting from the move, what is the value they're expecting delivered back, the justification to the business, something we help with during the pre-sale stage, and then really whereabouts does that project sit as a priority for the current for that company. So now we understand the motivations for the business and why we want to move. We've got the right backing within the company. We're moving on to the planning stage. So this is a case of looking at a digital estate, what's out there at the moment, aligning the right people within the organisation. So where we need executive endorsement throughout the company to make sure that we get the prioritisation that we need for this project. The people that are going to be delivering the project, so those within the IT department, who's responsible for that. One gap that kind of does get missed sometimes is the skill readiness plan, and this is really important. If you're part of that team being asked to migrate from where you are now into Azure, have you got the skills to do that? Have you been given the time to do the training and understand that? If you're right at the beginning and you haven't done it already, I'd recommend Azure Fundamentals. It's a free course online. You can study it as much as you like. There's an exam at the end to kind of validate to yourselves, and you can share that on LinkedIn that you're starting to learn about Azure. It's really good in as much as it gets you used to the type of language and the concepts and everything that Microsoft Azure are talking about, and this will really help you as you move forward. So the last part, on that list, the cloud adoption plan. So we've got our plan. The plan itself should be a detailed plan of how you're going to make success of moving from your current environment onto Azure. So we've got our plan in place. The next step is the ready phase, and this is where the landing zone sits. So building your first landing zone, expanding on that landing zone for additional workloads that are going to arrive. And really using this best practice validation. So looking at the best practice provided by a Cloud Adoption Framework, so you can build this out all in infrastructure as code. You can embed those best practices, design everything up front, and start on the right foot for your journey of using Microsoft Azure. So the last bit within this phase, the kind of doing phase, is the adopt. This is the fun part, really. This is where you're starting to migrate workloads. This is where you're starting to potentially build new workloads. So depending on your approach, you might have a deadline. You might not have as much time as you would like to get moved across onto Azure. You may be looking to do migrations and then modernising for cloud native technologies and modernising your workloads once they're already on the cloud. Or you may have times on your side, want to plan this out in a different way, and you actually want to replicate those services in the cloud by innovating and developing new cloud native tooling to really making the most of that platform straight away. To be honest, most customers we see, there'll be a mixture of both. Sometimes they'll have workloads that are problematic, and really migrating them is what they need to do, where they need to take more time to work out how to replace them. And there's some stuff that you can do straight away, perhaps moving from IaaS to PaaS services for some of the workloads that you have out in the cloud. So underpinning all of that doing, if you like, if all of the stuff that's actionable by yourself, is governance and management. We're going to touch on both of these in some of the rest of the slides. But from a governance point of view, you may well have industry standards or regulatory requirements that you need to stick to, and you need to make sure that that's happening on Azure as it does with what you've got currently. And then management, a cloud operating model is different from on what you've got on potentially on-prem. You need to make sure that you understand what your business commitments are. So what do you currently have to give back to the company and the business that you work for from an IT point of view? What does it have to deliver? How do you replicate that within Azure? That becomes your operations baseline. This is the minimum that I know I have to deliver. Then how do you innovate? How do you then mature that operation to start adding more value to the business, start getting more insights to what it is that you're doing? So that's where a landing zone sits. Now we're going to talk about what a landing zone is. So this is the best sentence I could really come up with. A landing zone is an environment for hosting your workloads in Azure, pre-provisioned through code. Sounds really nice and simple. And it is. The actual deployment of the landing zone is straightforward. You've done all the work up front, you've written all the code, you follow best practice, you've got everything in place, and now when you come to deploy it, that's the easy part. So landing zones themselves will be different for different customers, but as I said at the top of the call, there's some common elements that I've seen across most of the landing zones that we deploy, and that's what we're going to focus on today.